On this Thursday night, fading hopes for peace in the Middle East, how Israel is shooting down pleas for a ceasefire.
We are continuing to hit Hezbollah with full force.
And how Canadian troops are bracing for an all-out war. Demanding answers, what Indigenous leaders say needs to happen to investigate the police-involved deaths of 9 Indigenous people. Recognizing a shameful part of Canada's past.
That's the way things were done.
The search for students forced into segregated schools. And Hurricane Helene gets stronger. The southeastern U.S. prepares for a punishing storm.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Hopes for a ceasefire along the Israeli-Lebanese border are diminishing. Israel has vowed to continue its fight against Hezbollah with full force. The promise came from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as he touched down in New York today, where he's expected to meet world leaders who will push him on a proposal for a 21-day pause. Today, Lebanese officials are reporting more than 24 deaths. And an Israeli ground offensive appears imminent. Tens of thousands of people are trying to move north and even get out of Lebanon. We'll have more in a moment on how Canada is preparing for potential evacuations. But we begin tonight with our Jeff Semple in Jerusalem.
No sign of any ceasefire in Lebanon. Instead, another round of Israeli airstrikes targeting the densely populated southern suburbs of Beirut, killing dozens, including Hezbollah's drone commander. In response, the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group fired right back. Just hours earlier, the U.S. president, among others, suggested a ceasefire was imminent.
We put out a statement for a 21-day ceasefire.
But Israel's prime minister, arriving at the United Nations, pushed back. Our policy is clear, says Benjamin Netanyahu. We are continuing to hit Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we achieve all our goals. First and foremost, returning the residents of the north safely to their homes. Reports in Israel claim their prime minister had privately agreed, then publicly reneged, facing internal political pressure. Externally, 35 countries, including Canada and the U.S., released yet another statement calling for the ceasefire.
Unless, at the end of the day, those countries are prepared to put sanctions on Israel, and I should add Lebanon, although Hezbollah, if they can, it is quite unlikely that the Israelis will be impressed.
Instead of sanctions, the U.S. signed another check, $8.7 billion for the Israeli military. Meanwhile, more Israeli soldiers and tanks arrived near the Lebanese border. Officials say they're preparing to launch a ground incursion.
This is not humanity. This is not justice.
This Canadian lives with his family in Beirut. His Canadian Lebanese parents, Hussein and Dat Tabaja, were just an hour's drive to his south. After Israel ordered residents in southern Lebanon to leave, they tried to escape, but became stuck in standstill traffic along with thousands of others. 4 hours after they'd left, Jalal says his parents stopped answering their phone.
So we thought we knew something was wrong.
After hours of searching through rows of charred vehicles, their worst fears were realized.
And when you realized that that was their car,
it matched the license plate, and Jalal found his mother's watch inside.
Seeing the car, Jeff, knowing that they were inside it, it's something else.
He was brought to the morgue to identify his parents among the dozens of bodies, but they were unrecognizable. The family's still waiting for DNA confirmation.
This was an attack on hundreds of square meters of cars and roads and fields and buildings. I mean, who are you really trying to hit? It's all civilians.
Their family, including 8 grandchildren, are still trapped in Beirut. They're trying to get a passport for the youngest, just 2 months old, to escape before a possible Israeli ground invasion. Now, for its part, the Israeli military says it's only targeting Hezbollah inside of Lebanon. And we may learn more about Israel's plan tomorrow when Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the United Nations. Neithu?
Jeff Semple in Jerusalem. Thanks, Jeff. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau repeated calls for any Canadians who are still in Lebanon to leave as soon as possible. And he reiterated the federal government will be ready to help.
We will, of course, continue to do whatever we can to encourage and support people in their departures from Lebanon. The time to leave Lebanon was weeks ago, but if you're still there, you need to leave if you're a Canadian.
And there are now also signs that the Canadian military is getting ready to help with those efforts. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson has more on that. Mercedes?
Neithu, Global News has learned that the Canadian Armed Forces is changing its posture, increasing troops in the region to give the Canadian government more flexibility, including the ability to move quickly if an evacuation is ordered. Canada's plan has been ready for months and some assets have been pre-positioned. But on Wednesday night, troops here received a warning order to be ready to leave Canada in 48 hours. The reason is less about escalation on the ground and more to do with the complexity of the potential evacuation operation and the time required to execute it. Troops will need to be positioned nearby to be able to react and to avoid getting stuck behind dozens of other countries who will all be trying to get their citizens out too. Sources warn an evacuation will be extremely difficult and chaotic. They say it is a safer and better bet for Canadians to leave Lebanon now. The challenge, many Canadians who live in Lebanon are leaving their homes behind, which means a high bar for getting out. Canada and Australia have jointly leased a cruise ship to transport their citizens if an evacuation is ordered. Neithu?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. Later on Global National, we'll take a deeper look at Hezbollah, its place in Lebanon, and how it rose to prominence. Today, U.S. President Joe Biden announced an $8 billion aid package to help Ukraine fight Russia as Ukraine's president paid a visit to Washington.
Will they allow you to send missiles deeper into Russia, Mr. President? Did they endorse your victory plan?
Volodymyr Zelensky sat down with Democratic and Republican leaders of the House and Senate before meeting with Biden. Donald Trump has suggested he would push Ukraine to cut a deal with Russia to end the war. He's planning to meet with Zelensky tomorrow in New York. Zelensky did meet today with the other presidential candidate, Kamala Harris.
We will continue to provide the security assistance Ukraine needs to succeed on the battlefield.
Today we have a new strong support package, as you said, and we have common view on the things that need to be done.
Back in Ukraine, Russia launched more than a dozen attack drones on Kyiv overnight. Most were shot down, but at least one made it through, damaging cars and an apartment building. 8 people were injured in separate attacks on Zaporizhia, a day after Russia appeared to raise the stakes in the conflict. Moscow is threatening nuclear retaliation if Western nations allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons to target deep inside Russia. You are looking at a shot of southern Florida. Strong winds and heavy rains are hammering the state. Hurricane Helene is now a Category 4 and is set to make landfall tonight. Flooding is already happening in many coastal areas, and residents still there are being urged to leave. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell joins me now. Anthony, what kind of dangerous conditions are expected along Helene's path?
Good evening, Neetu. There are multiple threats with this storm. Initially, it is all about the storm surge and those powerful winds right at landfall. And on our satellite imagery, you can see where things are going awry. This has been intensifying all day, now wrapping fully around the center. Those cold cloud tops, a sign of intensification, a small pinpoint eye in the middle, and the Hurricane Hunter aircraft that have been flying in and out, sampling the winds and measuring a pressure in the eye that is going down. Another sign of intensification. Already we've had wind gusts over 100 kilometers per hour. It's extending out rather far from the center, and this is just the beginning. So that storm surge later tonight at landfall expected to be 5 to 6 meters. Unsurvivable. That's the word from the National Hurricane Center and a lot of the local National Weather Service offices, along with emergency management. So storm surge, 250 kilometer per hour winds. So we've got a lot to deal with Hurricane Helene. Neetu?
Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell. Thanks, Anthony. The Assembly of First Nations is calling for Indigenous oversight in the investigation into the death of a man in Calgary. Jon Wells, a member of Blood Tribe First Nation, died after an interaction with Calgary police last week. He's one of 9 Indigenous people to die in police altercations just since the end of August. Advocates say it's a tragic trend which can't be ignored. Yourex-West reports on the calls for accountability.
He's a gentle giant, very, very gentle, very quiet.
In life, Jon Wells was a well-known member of the Blood Tribe, a competitive steer wrestler active in the rodeo circuit.
To greet him, he was always very respectful and always glad to meet up with us.
The 42-year-old died at this hotel in Calgary on September 17th. According to ACERT, the agency tasked with investigating serious police incidents in Alberta, Wells died after officers responded to a call of an unwanted person in the lobby. He was unarmed, visibly confused, and had his arms in the air. But body-worn cameras captured officers tackling and punching Wells, deploying a taser, putting a spit mask on his head, and leaving Wells in arm and leg restraints face down on the ground for several minutes. He was also given a sedative by paramedics. He was declared dead minutes later.
It was just horrific, and it was hurtful to read that report.
The Assembly of First Nations National Chief has asked Canada's Public Safety Minister for Indigenous oversight in the investigation of the death of Jon Wells and 8 other Indigenous people who died following altercations with police. In a statement, the minister says independent police oversight bodies are conducting investigations in all regions where incidents occurred, and he will not comment further until those investigations are done.
I would just ask folks to suspend judgment and let the investigation take its course. It's a very complex situation, for sure. There's layers to this, and those will obviously come out with the investigation.
Still, Indigenous people continue to be overrepresented when it comes to Canada's criminal justice system, incarcerated and killed in police-involved incidents at much higher rates.
There's been inquiries and commissions and truth commissions and the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The lack of accountability and the lack of change is devastating, is shocking.
And heartbreaking for the families left behind. Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
A long-simmering political scandal is reaching a boiling point in America's largest city. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been federally indicted on multiple criminal charges related to bribery and fraud. As Jackson Prosco explains, the allegations involve years of gifts and favors with foreign nationals.
By the time New Yorkers woke up to the news, the FBI had already raided the mayor's official residence. Soon after, prosecutors unsealed federal charges against Eric Adams, including bribery, conspiracy, and fraud.
For the first time in New York City's modern history, we announced criminal charges against the sitting mayor of New York City.
The indictment alleges that for a decade, Adams was showered with gifts and donations from people connected to the Turkish government, including business-class flights around the world and high-end hotel stays, with his campaign underwritten by illegal foreign donations that Adams is accused of falsely reporting to bilk taxpayers out of $10 million worth of public campaign financing. In exchange, prosecutors say Adams delivered favors, like ordering the New York Fire Department to waive inspections on a new Turkish consulate despite safety concerns.
We allege that when the Turkish government official needed him, Adams also took corrupt official action in exchange for some of the luxury travel benefits.
We are not surprised. We expected this.
Adams, who is a former police captain, denies any wrongdoing and says he won't resign.
I will continue to do the job for 8.3 million New Yorkers that I was elected to do.
A cloud of scandal has hung over him for nearly a year, ever since the FBI seized his electronic devices and raided the home of his chief fundraiser. 4 other federal investigations have ensnared high-ranking members of his administration, including the police commissioner.
There's no one running the show right now. I think that if he had any honor, any dignity, and any love for this great city of New York, he would resign.
If Adams won't leave, he could be forcibly removed by the governor. Even in a city that has seen everything, no one has ever seen anything like this. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
An award-winning Canadian musician charged. Coming up, the sexual assault allegations against Kanon. Popular Canadian musician Kanon has been charged with sexual assault over a Quebec City incident dating back 14 years. The rapper and singer is widely known for his 2009 global hit single Waving Flag. He's also won multiple Juno Awards and had just won his first Grammy Award this year. Mike Armstrong has more details on the accusations. Mike?
According to court documents, the charges stem from an incident in 2010. Kanon was in Quebec City performing at a summer music festival.
Give me freedom, give me fire.
Now, Kanon is best known for the song Waving Flag. It was a worldwide hit and an anthem at the 2010 FIFA World Cup. Well, in July of that year, according to a complaint filed with police, Kanon would have sexually assaulted a victim in their 20s. The artist's real name is Kanon Abdi Warsame, born in Somalia. He moved to Canada in his teens and grew up in Toronto. He now lives in New York City. Now, Kanon did not appear in court in Quebec City in person. He was represented by a lawyer. A preliminary hearing will be held April 23rd of next year. The artist has asked for a trial by jury in English. Neetu?
All right, Mike Armstrong in Montreal. Thanks, Mike. The history of Hezbollah. Ahead, a look at the militant group that is integrated into life in Lebanon. The escalating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has 5.5 million people in Lebanon fearing what could come next. Lebanon itself is a country deeply divided along religious lines. Around 30% of its citizens are Christian, 30% are Sunni Muslim, and another 30% are Shia Muslim. Many, but not all Shias, support Hezbollah. Redmond Shannon on the complex dynamics of Hezbollah.
Lebanon on edge and on the edge of falling into an abyss. The possibility of an Israeli ground invasion stoking fears of a repeat of the hugely destructive month-long war between Hezbollah and Israel in 2006, sparked by Hezbollah capturing Israeli soldiers.
Now the situation is different. Israel wants to break Hezbollah, not just push them outside the border area. And the Israelis seem to be determined.
Hezbollah was formed in 1982 in the middle of Lebanon's 15-year civil war. The Shiite Muslim group is one of the most armed non-state actors in the world. Its political wing has significant power within Lebanon's precarious system of government, which shares power between different religious groups.
Let's be clear, many Shiites don't support Hezbollah.
Last month, Hezbollah released this video appearing to demonstrate its military assets. Global News cannot verify the footage. Canada, the US and others classify Hezbollah as a terrorist group. It is backed by Iran and is regarded as one of Tehran's proxies, along with Hamas in Gaza and the Houthis in Yemen. All want to see Israel wiped off the map.
I don't think Hezbollah is going to throw the towel anytime soon. You have to understand Hezbollah, it has an ideology that includes the importance of martyrdom.
After Israel is believed to have targeted the electronic devices of Hezbollah members last week, its leader Hassan Nasrallah promised revenge, saying he won't let Israeli residents return to their homes close to the Lebanese border.
Lebanon as a nation and a state is going to suffer dramatically.
Potentially another brutal chapter in Lebanon's bloody modern history. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, stories from students of a segregated school in Nova Scotia. A Nova Scotia museum is searching for students who attended segregated schools. Several provinces had segregated schools, and in Nova Scotia, the last one didn't close until 1983. Heidi Petrachik spoke with a former student and those who want to make sure the experiences aren't lost.
The chalkboard was like an easel.
84-year-old Maxine Goff still remembers the kitchen that was her classroom at one of Nova Scotia's segregated schools.
The house belonged to Mrs. Plessa Caldwell, and one room was used for the school.
A white woman, Caldwell started teaching in her home after meeting a 14-year-old African Nova Scotian boy who couldn't read. Black children had been banned from the community school.
The school was between Mrs. Caldwell's house and our home, and we walked back and forth past it.
By 1942, Caldwell's so-called kitchen school had 19 students, held concerts, and organized field trips.
It was hard to believe it took place until 1954 when legislation came out that segregated schools were no longer to be.
For years, a display at Fultz House Museum in Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia featured Caldwell until museum volunteers realized the biggest chapter in the story was missing.
I'm glad you're here.
Enter filmmaker Anne Verrill and journalist Cheryl Grant, who located and interviewed Goff while working on another project.
There's a legacy of inequality and oppression that still kind of filters through today.
They're now helping the museum find and document the stories of former students.
All right. We always use that door.
Oh, you always use the side door?
Recently taking Goff and fellow classmate Frida Henry back to see the old property.
She had a map on the wall like this.
The only way to actually bring light to it is to actually talk to the people that are still alive.
We got a good education. We had a very close relationship with Mrs. Caldwell.
Goff became a teacher herself and went to university. Her story, one of many to be shared with future generations. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia.
That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is Umbrella Alley in Quebec City. Thanks so much for watching and have a great night.